For these 6 individuals, their final moments came not from accidents or illness. From a cheating husband's deadly Valentine's surprise to a slumlord's final eviction notice, these are the stories of people whose actions created enemies willing to kill for justice. It was September 18th, 2018, in a rural township outside Yuba City, California. The evening air was still and warm as residents settled in after sunset, unaware that a calculated act of revenge was unfolding on a secluded property at the edge of farmland. Daniel Hargreave, 41, was known locally as a private contractor who handled renovation work for low-income housing. Multiple former clients later described disputes over incomplete work, withheld payments, and threats of legal action that never materialized. One of those clients was Miguel Alvarez, a 36-year-old farmhand who had hired Hargreave months earlier to repair a rental unit he shared with his family. Records showed Miguel paid in installments, but the work stalled. When Miguel pressed for refunds, Hargreave responded by filing a civil complaint accusing him of property damage, a claim later dismissed. Phone records showed escalating contact between the 2 men in the weeks before September 18th. That night, Hargreave agreed to meet Miguel at a rural property owned by a relative, after Miguel claimed he had cash to settle the dispute. What happened next was reconstructed through forensic evidence and surveillance footage recovered from nearby farm equipment cameras. Investigators determined that an altercation occurred near a storage shed shortly after Hargreave arrived. Blood evidence showed Hargreave sustained multiple stab wounds to the abdomen and upper thigh. The injuries caused significant blood loss, but did not damage major organs or arteries. A forensic pathologist later concluded the wounds were survivable with prompt medical care. Hargreave did not receive care. Instead, evidence showed he was moved while still alive. Tire impressions matched Miguel's vehicle, and drag marks led toward a capped septic system servicing an unused farmhouse on the property. The concrete access lid had been removed earlier that day. Investigators determined Hargreave was positioned face down at the open septic access, with his airway directly exposed to the confined gases. The lid was then replaced, and there were no signs of restraint or defensive movement consistent with rapid incapacitation. The autopsy revealed that Hargreave died from acute hydrogen sulfide exposure and oxygen deprivation. Toxicology results showed he was alive when exposed to the gas. The concentration levels within the tank would have caused rapid respiratory paralysis and loss of consciousness within seconds. Death followed shortly after. The stab wounds contributed to incapacitation, but were not the cause of death. Hargreave's body was discovered 3 days later when a maintenance worker arrived to service the septic system after pressure alarms were triggered. Emergency responders pronounced him dead at the scene. Miguel Alvarez was arrested after investigators reviewed phone records, vehicle data, and blood evidence linking him to the site. During questioning, he admitted to the confrontation and stabbing, but claimed he believed Hargreave would survive. Prosecutors argued the disposal was deliberate and retaliatory. They cited Miguel's knowledge of the septic system, the timing of the meeting, and the decision to leave without seeking help. He was charged with second-degree murder. At trial, the jury found that while the stabbing showed intent to harm, the act of placing Hargreave into the septic system demonstrated conscious disregard for life. Miguel was convicted and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Investigators concluded the case was a revenge killing, carried out not with a final blow, but by abandoning a living victim in an environment known to be lethal. It was August 14th, 2016, outside Kingman, Arizona. The desert heat lingered into the night as a small group of motorcycle riders gathered along a rural stretch of highway they had used for years. The road was isolated, flat, and rarely patrolled, making it a popular spot for informal but organized races among locals. Tyler Grant, 24, was one of the regulars. He was not well known outside the group and had no online following. He worked at an auto parts store during the week and spent most weekends tuning his bike and racing with friends. The races were competitive, Riders timed their runs, compared speeds, and sometimes placed small bets. Everyone involved understood the risks, but the group trusted one another. Evan Miller, 25, had been racing alongside Tyler since high school. They rebuilt engines together and often rode in pairs. In recent months, however, the dynamic between them changed. Tyler had upgraded his motorcycle and began winning consistently. Evan started telling others that Tyler was cheating by pushing past what they had informally agreed was fair. No rules were written, and no one could prove anything. The group dismissed the complaints as frustration. Text messages later recovered by investigators showed Evan accusing Tyler of stealing wins and making him look bad. Tyler continued racing and did not respond publicly. On the night of August 14th, several riders met at their usual pull-off. Witnesses said Tyler mentioned doing a solo run down the road before the rest of the group arrived. Evan left shortly afterward, saying he was heading ahead to check the route. Investigators later determined that Evan drove farther down the road to a narrow section bordered by fixed structures on both sides. At some point, a steel cable was placed across the roadway at a height that would not be visible to an approaching rider at speed. There were no warning lights or markings. Minutes later, Tyler entered the stretch of road at high speed. The area was dark, and there was no time to react. He struck the cable and was thrown from his motorcycle. The injuries were catastrophic and fatal. Two riders who had started their own run shortly after Tyler heard the crash and arrived moments later. They found the motorcycle down, and the cable still stretched across the road. One rider called for help while another stayed with the scene. Investigators documented distinct cable impact marks and damage patterns on both the motorcycle and Tyler's body. Witness statements placed Evan ahead of Tyler on the route shortly before the crash. Tire tracks and tool marks were later matched to equipment found in Evan's vehicle. When questioned, Evan initially denied being on that stretch of road. Phone location data and witness timelines placed him there minutes before the crash, and tool marks on the cable matched equipment recovered from his vehicle. Evan Miller was arrested and charged with first-degree murder for the deliberate placement of a deadly obstruction. Prosecutors argued the act showed premeditation and was motivated by retaliation over perceived cheating. In 2018, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. The racing group disbanded after the conviction. Tyler Grant's death was officially ruled a homicide caused by a targeted act of revenge carried out by someone he considered a friend. It was February 14th, 2017 in Plano, Texas. The evening was warm for winter, and the neighborhood was quiet as Marcus Thompson pulled into his driveway after work. Marcus, 38, was a successful real estate agent whose personal life had begun to unravel months earlier. Financial records later confirmed an ongoing affair with his secretary, hotel stays, gifts, and unexplained charges. 3 weeks before Valentine's Day, his wife Diana, 36, uncovered the evidence while preparing tax paperwork. Phone records and receipts confirmed what she suspected. She did not confront him, and to friends, nothing appeared outwardly different. Phone data later recovered by investigators showed that shortly after discovering the affair, Diana searched repeatedly for residential water heaters, scalding temperatures, and how quickly hot water could cause incapacitating burns. No service calls or repair requests were ever made, despite her later statements that she had been inspecting the heater. On the afternoon of Valentine's Day, while Marcus was at work, Diana accessed the gas water heater in the utility closet. Inspectors later confirmed the thermostat had been manually adjusted far beyond recommended safety limits, high enough to cause severe burns within seconds of contact. There was no mechanical malfunction and no evidence of accidental adjustment. That evening, Marcus returned home, ate dinner, and mentioned showering before bed. Sometime after 10 p.m., he entered the upstairs bathroom and turned on the water. The temperature surged almost immediately. Medical experts later testified that exposure at that level would have caused instant pain and rapid skin damage, triggering a reflexive withdrawal that likely caused him to lose footing on the wet tub surface. Evidence showed Marcus attempted to step back, but slipped inside the tub as the water continued running. Neighbors later reported hearing a single heavy thud through the shared wall, followed by the sound of water that did not shut off. There was no further noise. Call logs showed that more than 20 minutes passed before emergency services were contacted. First responders found Marcus collapsed in the tub, with extensive scald injuries across his torso, arms, and upper legs. He was alive but in critical condition, showing signs of shock and severe thermal trauma. He was transported to a regional burn center, where he died early the next morning from complications related to the burns and resulting organ failure. The death was initially considered a household accident. That changed when investigators examined the water heater. The temperature setting exceeded manufacturer limits and local safety codes, and could only have been changed manually. Diana's statements about when she last accessed the heater shifted over time. Phone data recovered during the investigation showed repeated searches related to scalding injuries and survivability in the weeks leading up to Marcus's death. Prosecutors argued the act was deliberate, revenge carried out by altering a lethal domestic system and allowing the consequences to unfold. The defense claimed recklessness. The jury ultimately convicted Diana of manslaughter, citing conscious disregard of a known deadly hazard. Marcus's death was ruled preventable. Investigators concluded it was not mechanical failure, but an intentional setup that turned an ordinary routine into a fatal act of revenge. It was November 23, 2016, in Camden, New Jersey. Early winter temperatures had settled over the city as Elena Rodriguez finished cleaning offices in a downtown building late into the evening. Elena, 34, was a single mother working multiple jobs to support her daughter, Sophia. Financial records later showed her income was stretched thin by medical expenses after Sophia was diagnosed with leukemia the year before. When her insurance failed to cover treatment costs, Elena turned to Anthony Castellano, 45, a local lender operating outside state licensing requirements. Castellano's loans carried interest rates far above legal limits, with penalties that compounded weekly. Payment records showed that despite consistent deposits from Elena, the balance increased steadily. Police later documented multiple complaints against Castellano from borrowers who described intimidation tactics, including unannounced visits to homes and workplaces. In Elena's case, school administrators later confirmed Castellano appeared near Sophia's high school on more than one occasion. By the fall of 2016, Elena's debt exceeded $40,000. Phone records showed frequent contact initiated by Castellano, including late-night calls. Investigators later determined Elena began monitoring his movements after those encounters, learning that he regularly used an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city to meet clients and store paperwork. On the evening of November 23rd, Elena contacted Castellano and told him she had cash to settle part of the debt. Cell tower data placed both individuals at the warehouse later that night. Surveillance footage from nearby buildings showed Elena entering alone, carrying a baseball bat, and leaving the area approximately 20 minutes later. Inside the warehouse, evidence indicated a violent confrontation occurred near the loading area. Blood spatter analysis showed multiple impacts to Castellano's head. The autopsy later identified extensive skull fractures, subdural hemorrhaging, and severe brain swelling consistent with repeated blunt force trauma. The medical examiner concluded Castellano lost consciousness quickly and died at the scene from catastrophic cranial injuries. Elena did not call for help. Investigators later recovered the baseball bat from a nearby dumpster, where it bore her fingerprints and Castellano's DNA. Castellano's body was discovered the following morning by a maintenance worker conducting a routine inspection. During the investigation, detectives uncovered Castellano's illegal lending operation and a documented pattern of harassment involving multiple victims. However, evidence also established that Elena had planned the encounter, brought a weapon, and lured Castellano to a private location under false pretenses. Elena was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. At trial, testimony from other borrowers provided context for Castellano's conduct. but prosecutors argued the killing was an act of deliberate retaliation rather than self-defense. The jury agreed, citing premeditation and the use of a weapon. Elena was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in state prison. Authorities later shut down Castellanos' lending operation, and several civil cases followed. Sofia was placed with relatives. The warehouse was demolished 2 years later as part of a redevelopment project. Investigators concluded the case illustrated how prolonged exploitation and personal retaliation combined to produce a fatal outcome that neither side survived. It was April 22, 2017, at a small community college in Mesa, Arizona. Evening classes had ended, and the indoor pool facility was moving into its normal closing period. Lights remained on, but most students had already left the building. Lila Moreno, 19, was a second-year student and a member of the college swim team. She was not a standout athlete and was not well known on campus. Teammates described her as consistent and quiet, someone who followed routines and focused on training. Earlier that semester, Lila had been selected for a limited paid training slot that allowed extended access to the pool after regular hours. Another swimmer on the team, Maya Cruz, 20, had competed for the same position and did not receive it. Teammates later said the two avoided each other during practice. No formal complaints were filed, and no arguments were reported to coaches. On the night of April 22nd, several swimmers stayed after scheduled practice to complete extra laps. Two teammates later told investigators they saw Lila and Maya speaking briefly near the pool deck. The exchange appeared calm and routine. One swimmer recalled Maya suggesting that Lila finish a short solo swim before closing, something that was common during training season. By around 9:30 p.m., most swimmers had left the building. A janitor was cleaning nearby hallways, and locker room staff were finishing closing tasks. Witnesses stated that Lila remained behind and entered the pool alone to swim in the deep end. There were no lifeguards on duty, which was standard for optional after-hours training. Maya stayed on the deck for a short time, then walked toward the side exit near the pool control area. Access records later showed she passed through that area shortly before leaving the building. The pool was equipped with a motorized cover that was routinely used at closing. According to maintenance staff, the cover was normally activated only after swimmers had exited the water. There were no announcements or warnings indicating the cover would be engaged early that night. While Lila was swimming, the pool cover was activated and moved across the surface of the water. From outside the pool, the area appeared closed for the night. With the cover in place, the water surface was no longer visible from the deck or hallway windows. Several minutes passed before a student walking through the building stopped at the windows and noticed an unusual outline beneath the pool cover that should not have been there. The student alerted staff. When the cover was reopened, Lila was found unresponsive in the water below. Two swimmers and the janitor later confirmed that Lila had been alone in the pool and that Maya was the last teammate seen near the deck and control area. Facility records showed the pool cover had been activated earlier than standard procedure. Investigators reviewed access logs, witness timelines, and messages documenting prior conflict related to team positions and personal disputes. Based on those findings, Maya Cruz was later charged in connection with Lila Moreno's death. The swim program was suspended the following year, and after-hours pool access was restricted. Lila Moreno's death was later cited internally as a case where routine procedures, trust, and deliberate action combined with fatal consequences. It was August 7, 2015, and the heat in downtown Detroit had climbed to 94 degrees Fahrenheit as crews rushed to finish a new office tower, rising over the city's revitalizing core. The project was behind schedule, and pressure from management filtered down through the site under the supervision of Vincent Russo. Vincent Russo, 45, had spent more than 2 decades in construction, earning a reputation for keeping projects moving regardless of strain on his crews. Workers described him as strict and dismissive, often assigning the heaviest tasks to newer hires and those who struggled with English. Complaints were rarely documented, and deadlines always came first. Carlos Mendez, 22, had worked on the site for 8 months. An immigrant from El Salvador, he sent most of his pay home to support his wife and children. He avoided conflict, took extra shifts when asked, and rarely spoke up. Co-workers later told investigators that Carlos was frequently assigned undesirable work and left without assistance. In the weeks leading up to the incident, Carlos reported missing tools and unexplained write-ups. Nothing changed. On the morning of August 7th, site security reported finding stolen copper wire inside Carlos's locker during a routine inspection, and he was fired immediately. At the time, no evidence supported his claim that the wire had been planted. Security footage reviewed later showed Vincent entering the locker area alone shortly before the inspection, carrying wire consistent with what was found. That footage was not reviewed until after the fatal incident. That evening, Carlos returned to the construction site. Investigators later determined he returned to the site intending to confront Vincent and hold him personally responsible for the framing and his termination. Several workers remained on overtime shifts as Carlos took an elevator to the 15th floor, where Vincent was reviewing plans near an unfinished perimeter edge. Witnesses reported a heated confrontation that escalated into a physical struggle. The floor's perimeter lacked permanent guardrails, with only temporary markings in place as crews rushed to meet deadlines. OSHA inspectors would later cite the site for missing required fall protection on multiple levels. During the struggle, Carlos forcefully shoved Vincent toward the open edge. Vincent lost balance and fell approximately 190 feet to the concrete below. Emergency responders pronounced him dead at the scene due to catastrophic blunt force trauma. Carlos immediately called 911 and remained on site until police arrived. He admitted to pushing Vincent, but stated the act was fueled by rage over the framing and loss of his job. Multiple witnesses corroborated the confrontation and confirmed the absence of safety railings. The investigation revealed a pattern of workplace harassment and safety violations. OSHA cited the construction company for multiple infractions related to fall protection. Security footage confirmed Vincent's role in planting the wire, substantiating Carlos's claim of retaliation and wrongful termination. Prosecutors argued that while Carlos had been provoked, the shove was a deliberate act of revenge rather than self-defense. He was charged with voluntary manslaughter. After considering mitigating factors, including lack of prior criminal history and documented workplace misconduct, the court sentenced Carlos to 4 years in prison. Thanks for watching. Click the next video to watch more.